a presentation of AIT.
In the last program, we talked about the foundations for literacy learning. Those were the general principles of child development and the broad patterns of developmental reading acquisition. Today, we'll complete laying the foundations by talking about what conditions should be present in the classroom to best support natural literacy learning. Knowledge of child development principles, patterns of developmental reading acquisition, and conditions of natural learning give teachers the power to make well-grounded curriculum and instruction decisions. These are the foundation for developmentally appropriate literacy programs. Our main guest is Brian Cambourne from Wollongong University in Australia. I had the opportunity to interview him at one of the International Reading Association conferences. We'll also take a look inside many classrooms where we will see children engaged in learning in rich literacy environments. Dr. Cambourne acquired his understandings about natural language learning by conducting research from his car.
And then we realized that in every culture, everybody learns to talk. That's a very complex kind of learning enterprise, and we thought, well, let's focus on that because it's common to all cultures. It's one example of culturally acquired learning, and let's see if we can find out what makes it so successful. And I got a fairly large grant at the time. I was working at a university where they had a physics department that had a good electronics man in it, and he built me a little radio transmitting microphone, and I spent about 3 years of my life bugging a small group of kids of various ages of toddlerhood. I'd arrive at their place early in the morning. Mum would put the bugging machine, the bugging device on them. I would sit half a mile up the road in a motor car with an FM receiver and hooked up to a tape recorder. And I followed them till they went to bed at night. I was trying to establish what it was that the caregivers, mothers, fathers, grandmothers, next door neighbours, brothers and sisters, what they did that made this enormously complex kind of learning occur. And I established a number of what I call co-researcher relationships with teachers. And I said to them, here's what I found out about how kids learn to talk, get control of the oral form of language. Would you guys like to help me see if it works in the classroom for getting control of the written form of language, for reading and writing and spelling? And over a period of years, several teachers have shown me how it can be put into practice in classrooms.
Dr. Cambourne and his teacher-researcher group identified a set of principles that describe what conditions best support natural literacy learning. They found that if those principles could be applied in classroom, literacy learning would be enhanced. Let's explore those conditions with Dr. Cambourne.
If we start at the top of the flow chart, the first word there is immersion. And it just means when little kids are learning to talk, what emerged from my data is that they were absolutely, totally immersed in what it is they had to learn. We argued, when I say we, I mean the teachers that were helping with this, said, well, what's the equivalent for the written form of language? And we argued that kids need to be given the same privilege. If they're going to learn how to use print at the very early stages of acquisition in kindergarten, then they need to be immersed in the visual forms of print. And so in many Australian classrooms, you'll find the room is just absolutely a sea of print. The walls are filled with it.
A pickle, his nose was made of pickle, his name was shaking drum.
So there's lots of visual immersion, but also oral immersion. So we think immersion is a pretty important learning condition. And when you remove that, you make learning that much more difficult.
The bears want to sleep, Miss Cat wants to sing, the kangaroos want to dance, pigs cooking, landlord...
The next condition down the flow chart is demonstration. Now, that's just a term that Frank Smith invented, but When little kids are learning to talk, they get literally millions of demonstrations of how to do it. Now, when you translate that to getting control of the written form of language, I think we owe kids the same privilege. We need to give them demonstrations, but they're a little different. Reading and writing involve lots of what I call invisible or covert processes, which we as teachers, as fluent readers and writers, we've all taken on board, and I think we've got to make them explicit for the kids that we're teaching. And so modelling or demonstrating or giving examples of how you do things is one form of demonstrating. And in good holistic classrooms in Australia and New Zealand, teachers do a lot of thinking out loud. This is how I read, this is how I spell, this is how I get over writer's block. Watch me while I show you how I compose a persuasive piece of writing. Observe me as I think out loud. And it's a way of letting kids in on the secrets of reading and writing.
During reading conferences, teachers have a chance to do think-alouds, which are demonstrations of how you do different parts of the reading and writing process. These can be done when a child gets stuck on a word or meaning. The teacher just thinks aloud, telling how the problem could be solved. Children are also good demonstrators for other children.
Heard that noise.
You want to do a story today? Okay, let's do a story called Where is Spot? And you see this.
One of the main demonstrations of reading is through story read-alouds. Family members reading aloud to the child. Then, later in school, teachers introduce an activity called the shared book experience, where they demonstrate concepts of print, such as where to start reading on the page and how to track the print on the page. We will talk about the shared book experience in depth in the next two programs. We want to create a literacy environment where they are surrounded by demonstrations of reading and writing, and where children are immersed in the best of children's literature. Charlotte Huck, whom I also had a chance to interview at the reading conference, is a national expert on children's literature. She described what to look for when you select books for a kindergarten and primary literacy environment.
What are some general criteria that you want to think about before you select any books? And the first one I always say is it really going to be fun? Is it a wonderful story that they're going to love? And that ought to apply to every single book that you select with children. And then I say, does it have some imaginative quality that really makes it literature? Unfortunately, I think there's a real blending of the lines between trade books and textbooks. And particularly with the emergent reader, we're getting quantities of little books written to formulas that don't have good plots and that are not going to delight children and that are not literary. Let me share just the first sentence of The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle that everybody knows, but I just love it. You know, this is the story of the caterpillar that eats his way through all kinds of good things. But just listen, in the light of the moon, a little egg lay on a leaf. Quiet, can you hear the alliteration of all those L's? In the light of the moon, a little egg lay on a leaf. Now compare that to, I don't have it with me, a little book, and it literally was in, out, out, go, go. That's unnatural speech, and we don't want that. So you look at the literary quality, and you also look at the language. And is it natural language, or is it contrived language? And I think that is something that you think about for all books. But you also look to see what kind of help the child is going to get from the book. Bruner established that wonderful word of scaffold in talking about how children learn language. That a child says, car go, and the mother replies, yes, we're going to go and visit grandmother in the car today, you know, as you extend that kind of language and build on it. Well, I think that we have books that provide scaffolding. And if you know what that is, then you can begin to look for it. For example, one that I just love is I Went Walking by Sue Williams, and it's illustrated by Julie Vivas. It's from Australia, and it's this delightful story of this little boy who says, I went walking, and then answer the question, what did you see? Then you have to look very, very closely to see that there is a cat in that basket. But then you turn the page and you say, I saw a black cat looking at me. And then it's repeated. You've got repetitive phrases. I went walking. What did you see? And then you can sort of guess that it's going to be a horse. The story is, the pictures are cumulative. Story is not. But at the very end, you can go back and you can point to the brown horse, to the red cow, to the pink pig, and there they all are. And then it does something else that really good literature and good illustrated stories. It has a little sub-story. And this little red-haired boy keeps taking off his clothes because he's getting hotter and hotter. And it's never mentioned in the story. It's just something fun that you can look for. Well, you've got the repetitive pattern. You've got the colors of the animals that are really very, very good. You've got the hidden animal before you turn the page to help you. Do you see all those scaffolds that are really there, besides a perfectly beautiful book to share with children?
Demonstration of reading with good books creates irresistible invitations to children to immerse themselves in print. Dr. Cambourne explained the additional conditions of learning.
Now, on most of the flowcharts that describe the conditions of learning, you'll find way out on the side a condition called engagement. And that's because Frank Smith taught me that you can't learn from a demonstration unless you engage with it. And in classrooms all over the world, I'm sure there are kids getting really good demonstrations from sincerely motivated teachers, but a lot of them aren't engaging with them. I mean, I first came across this when I noticed kids sitting next to each other in the same classroom, where one kid learned and the other kid didn't. Same immersion, same demonstrations. And when I asked the special educators in my country why this was so, they came up with the standard response. They said, there's something wrong with that kid. A deficit, there's something wrong. Now, I knew that wasn't true because I knew the kids really well. And so I did some research to try to find out what it is that causes engagement to occur. What's emerged from that, three clear principles have emerged. And I can only express them in terms of probabilities. You are more likely to engage deeply with a demonstration if you really believe that ultimately you're capable of doing or owning whatever is being demonstrated. And that holds up in the learning to talk context. Kids really believe that ultimately they'll be able to do it, and nobody gives them messages to the contrary. So if you want to increase the probability that kids will engage with what you're demonstrating, then you have to give off the message that you expect them to be able to do it, and that's where that expectation. Once kids get the message that they don't think they're capable of doing it, then they won't engage with the demonstration. The demonstration will just wash over the top of them, no residue left at all, or very little residue. And so if they're put, I don't know what you call them over here, but the bottom group in reading, you know, we have the kookaburras and the kingfishers and the koalas, and then there's a group that you call them the buzzards, we call them the wombat group. You know, they get the special teacher who comes in, they get the tatty, worn-out old books, and the very clear message is, hey kid, we really don't expect that you'll be able to do that, and they don't. I mean, they don't engage with what's going on except that we can't do it. So one principle of engagement is you really got to believe that you're capable of doing it. And you usually get that belief from those that are around you, the messages they give you. The second principle which emerged from this research into engagement was that you are more likely to engage with a demonstration if you believe there's something in it for you, if it will further the purposes of your life. The third principle, or a third principle, which emerged from our engagement research is that You are more likely to engage with a demonstration if you feel that when you do have a go at engaging and you don't get it perfect, then nobody's going to demean you or hurt you or injure you or cause you pain in any way. And that has implications for the kinds of standards we give kids when they're learning. I mean, if we give them the message that when you engage with this demonstration, you've got to get it right the very first time, and if you don't, we're going to embarrass you or punish you, then they're not going to engage. They sit in what I call the safety boundary. They won't take risks. They don't move beyond.
There is a hamster chasing a cat.
The next one on the chart is expectations, and I mean, it just simply means you give kids very high expectations, very authentic expectations. Little kids really believe that they can do anything until somebody tells them different. The next one on that chart, I think from memory, is responsibility. And all I mean by that is kids, learners, when they're learning to talk, are left to make some decisions themselves. Nobody predetermines exactly what it is they're going to learn next. I suppose responsibility is another way of saying owning your learning or making some decisions about how you'll do it, when you'll do it. I think all of that is really important. Once you start to take that condition away from the learning context, then you make learning that much more difficult for the less able kid.
The idea that learners should take responsibility for their own learning is the condition of learning that is probably most misunderstood. In his book, The Whole Story, he discusses the misconceptions. Teachers will tend to think he's just saying, I don't need to teach. If we let the kids take responsibility for their own learning, how can we be assured that they will learn what's best for them? It conjures up visions of undisciplined, unmanaged classrooms where kids only do what they want to do, images of kids running wild. It doesn't mean kids can choose not to learn, or that teachers just stand back and let it happen, or that children can only do those things that interest them. It means making choices commensurate with one's own level of knowledge and ability. So the teacher sets the constraints, and children get to make choices within those constraints, like on this simple kindergarten activity chart.
The next condition down is, I think, employment or use. You learn language, and you learn about language, and you learn through language while you're using it. All of those three things are occurring simultaneously, and classrooms depend a great deal on activities. Kids need to do things, they need to practice, they need to use reading and writing. Nobody gives the kid a ditto shot there, and they learn to talk, and they do it well. What is it that mums and dads and grandmas do? What activities, quote, do they give kids to do that enable them to use language, and as a consequence, they learn it? That's what we've got to do with reading and writing.
Room arrangement does contribute to engagement. Susan Newman found this out in a study she did where she designed a kindergarten classroom to integrate literacy use into play. Susan shared the results of her work during an interview at the reading conference.
Very often what we do in the very beginning is we go to a preschool environment or a kindergarten, and we find that all of the play areas are against walls. Do you know? So there's this large open space in the middle, right? And then like the kitchen will be in one area, and the office will be over here, and maybe blocks will be over here with just this huge area in between. And the children don't play well in that environment. In fact, they get very wild in the center without any kind of constraint. And so what we do is we change these areas using semi-fixed structures to create little cozy networks. And we put one of the centers against the other. For example, the children go from the kitchen to the office. We developed play environments which included natural literacy objects, and there were 3 criteria for the construction of these environments. And one was, is it something that the children would normally see in their environment? So is it authentic? In other words, does it mean something to the children? Secondly, can it be utilized effectively by these children? Is it something meaningful to them? And 3, is it safe? Or is it something that they won't, well, seriously, is it something that they won't stick in their mouths and hurt themselves using? We find that these little areas the play tends to be much more creative in that kind of environment than when we have large open spaces. So that was a critical factor as well.
The next condition, I think, is one that I call approximation, and that's absolutely basic to learning to talk. I mean, we actually encourage kids to produce wrong grammar. We celebrate it. I mean, baby talk is very cute and irresistible. It's as if we're almost pre-programmed to support it, so that when a little kid sees his daddy's sock on the floor and he points at it and he says, "That daddy sock," we don't say, "Oh my God, he screwed up the auxiliary, he hasn't got the apostrophe in place." We usually celebrate that. I mean, when my kids were growing up, I called the neighbours in from next door and said, "Listen to my kid, listen to what he's saying." What he was saying was absolutely wrong. It was wrong grammar, it was wrong English, it was wrong pronunciation. But I knew it was temporary, that it would drop out of the repertoire. Kids don't continue to say, "Dat daddy sock." They end up saying, "That's daddy's sock." And they do it easily. And well, they do the same thing with reading and writing. Approximations are absolutely fundamental to learning.
We can see those approximations everywhere in classrooms based on the sound principles of child development, respect for the patterns of reading acquisition, and the conditions of learning. Children who are immersed in print are using it in purposeful ways to make meaning and are unafraid to make mistakes. Why? Because the adults in the environment, the teachers, know that this is temporary spelling or temporary reading, just like temporary talking that Brian mentioned. Mistakes are viewed as windows to the mind, little insights into how the child is figuring out the new-to-him piece of the language puzzle, and where children are in their patterns of reading development.
And that's where the next condition comes in, the response condition. When little kids are learning to talk and they say something like, "Dat daddy sock," and it is daddy's sock, the truth value is correct, it's not a shoe or something, then most parents in most cultures the world over, most caregivers, usually respond the same way. If you translate that to a kid having a conference with a teacher over a piece of text that they're writing, the teacher may look at it and say, "Oh my God, he can't spell, he's got where and where mixed up, he's confused of and from, capitalisation is really a mess, he doesn't understand periods." The kid needs to know that he can't learn all of those things at once. He needs to be in a climate where he understands that those things ultimately have to be learned, but there's no way in the world that he can get them all right at the same time. And so what the teachers that I work with usually do is make a decision, and they say to the kid, "You've got this, this and this really under control, that's good. You need a bit of help with capitalisation. There are some other things we'll pick up later, but I think you're ready for capitalisation now. Now, tune in very carefully because I'm going to demonstrate to you what it is that you need to know in order to get capitalisation or periods or whatever it is under control." And she will demonstrate that there and then, but in the context of the kid's own piece of work. He sees and understands where it fits in. The problem of orchestrating it isn't a difficult thing because it's there in front of him. And the expectation is, I've demonstrated that to you now, it's yours. Go away and put it into practice. And I can't see how in a busy classroom you can do anything that's any different to that.
Those are the powerful conditions of learning that work together to produce meaningful literacy learning. Let's review where we are at this point in the series. We've grounded our literacy instruction in sound principles of child development and an understanding of the patterns of developing reading and writing acquisition. These, in turn, are practiced in an environment that supports children's natural learning. This is characterized by opportunities for children to be immersed in a print-rich environment where there are multiple demonstrations of literacy with conditions which support engagement. First, children's beliefs that they can do it. Second, belief that this is a useful activity. And third, belief that it's a safe environment. It is more likely that children will engage if the following conditions are met. There must be high expectations for children's learning, a belief that they can do it. The children are given responsibility for their learning, or, to put it another way, to be able to make some choices. Children have opportunities to use or practice literacy in a variety of situations. Approximations must be accepted as part of the natural course of learning. Responses should be supportive. These responses should be demonstrations of the literacy behavior and non-threatening. We look forward to taking you inside some kindergarten and primary classrooms in the following programs so that you can see all of the theory put into action. Someone said that there is nothing as practical as a sound theory. To know what you think and believe and why will consistently guide your actions and decision-making in developing excellent literacy environments for your children.
Chicken.